Right guys, as a Manchester United fan, I was hoping I could make this video in more lighter circumstances after a win, but we've just lost 3-1 to Arsenal. Stings, heartbreaking loss. You don't obviously want to lose a game of football in that manner. I felt we were a bit unlucky, but overall the result, if I'm being honest, was a fair one. Arsenal probably did deserve it in terms of they did play better football. They did, dominate the ball a lot more. And I felt when you only have one counter-attacking, when you've only got one game plan, which is counter-attacking football, you can't always be relying on it. And especially the way that Man United played, I'm going to tell you why counter-attacking for Manchester United was just not the best idea. So let's go back to one of the problems that United had at the start of the game, especially in the first half, was United really struggled to retain possession. And the reason for that is the way Arsenal stopped United in the build-up. So Arsenal in red, United in green. And if you look at the way that United tried to build out from the back, they often dropped either Eriksen or Casemiro into their line of defence between their centre halves to build up from the back. Now the problem with that is Arsenal almost pressed with a front four, and when Arsenal pressed with a front four, their aim was to cut out the passing lanes. So as you can see here, the aim was by Arsenal was to make sure that they cut out the passing lane. Here they tried to cut the passing lane out here, and that's what they did. They tried to make sure that United couldn't pass the ball forwards and play progressive passes. So essentially what would happen is Casemiro was here, and then what United had to do was they had to go side. They moved the ball side to side, and then Arsenal would just creep forward a bit by bit. And then the problem with that was Eriksen was the only player up that could, receive the ball from the three centre halves, because Casemiro had dropped in between the centre halves. And as a result of that, they marked Eriksen as well. So Eriksen had a player on him, so Eriksen couldn't receive the ball, and the ball couldn't go through because Arsenal had, what they had done is they'd cut out the passing lanes between them. That's what Arsenal did, especially with the front four. So that forced United either to get the ball, and that forced United to either go wide and then try and hoof the ball into this channel here for Rashford to run onto, or they tried to go this side for Antony to run onto. And then the problem that occurs with that is it wasn't very successful because Arsenal were waiting for it. They were waiting for that game plan. They were waiting for the long ball, and the defenders were ready to, they were anticipating winning a header, etc., etc. It just wasn't a good game plan. And then another thing that United had to do was, because Arsenal was so good at putting pressure in this area, United were, forcing the ball out wide quite a lot. Arsenal was so good at pinning United's wing-backs down. So essentially what would happen is United would go to Onana. They'll bring the ball back to their keeper. And what Onana tried to do was he almost tried to come out as well with the ball, try and relieve some pressure off his centre halves to try and get his centre halves to push up. And the only game plan United had was to, again, try to bring the ball into this space here, to either where Rashford or Antony or Martial were. And again, United really struggled with that because, again, Arsenal left one player back in midfield. Sometimes it was a Rice sitting in front of the front four. And essentially what Arsenal wanted was, while, you had Odegaard, Havertz, Nketiah, Saka and Martinelli up, they had Rice covering that area. So when the ball did go long, they could win the second ball. And I think that's why United struggled, because their game plan really went to pieces when they couldn't hold on to the ball when building out from the back. Essentially, what would happen is Onana would go long, and then the ball would come straight back at Man United because it was Arsenal that was winning the ball. So you often had Gabriel and Saliba here, and you had Rice sitting right here. And I think Arteta tactically outsmarted Ten Hag there because every time Onana went long, it was an Arsenal player getting on the end of the headers or winning the second ball. And I think that's what made a lot of United players a bit frustrated in their body language. Another thing is when United do play counter-attacking football, the biggest problem is Casemiro and Eriksen. They're two old players. So as the game wears on, the problem with that is you got two players past their 30s in midfield, and United's decision making at the end with like Antony and Rashford, especially in their counter attacks, were not good enough. It was that simple. And then as the game stretches and as the game wears on and it goes more of an end-to-end style, Casemiro and Eriksen simply don't have the legs to keep playing at that intensity or that level. So then what tends to happen is Man United tends to lose their shape because essentially what happens is they become a lot easier to play through. There's gaps between Eriksen and Casemiro, and that's what caused Arsenal to really dominate the game in terms of possession as the game went on, especially in the latter stages. Again, United were just looking for the counter. When the counter wasn't working, they had to run back, and there's only so much that Casemiro and Eriksen can do. So I think the counter attack going forward, due to the mobility of United's players and the mobility of United's players in midfield, is just not going to be good in the long term.